3 months after the verdict, after the courtroom fell silent and Camille Langley walked away with full custody, her dignity and the truth finally on record, she thought it was over. She thought the man who tried to erase her with lies would disappear into the shadows of disgrace and let their children begin to heal. Richard Langley had vanished from headlines, fled from press, pulled out of every public board he once chaired. For a while, it looked like justice had done its work. But then the envelope came. No warning, no phone call, just a courier at Camille's door and a white legal letter signed in ink. It was from Richard's new legal team. He wanted custody, not visitation, not shared holidays. He wanted Owen and Bella full-time, claimed Camille was unstable, unfit, and emotionally manipulative. And more than that, he had filed the paperwork from outside the United States, because Richard Langley wasn't just trying to reclaim his children, he was orchestrating something bigger, something more calculated than Camille had ever faced before. The man she thought she had defeated in court wasn't retreating. He was recalibrating, and this time he had nothing left to lose. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Camille Langley stared at the envelope on her kitchen table for a long time before opening it. The same table where Owen had once built his third-grade volcano project and Bella used to practice her cursive. 3 months earlier, she had walked out of court with their hands in hers, believing for the first time in years that peace might be possible. But now, with just one signature, Richard Langley was threatening to rewrite everything again. The legal motion claimed he had turned over a new leaf, that he had stepped away from public life to focus on family, and that he was prepared to offer a stable international environment for the children. But Camille knew better. The man who once fabricated DNA doubts just to win a divorce was not suddenly trying to be a father. Something else was happening. But what was it? Why did Richard suddenly want full custody? And why now, after disappearing from the country, after abandoning his name and walking away from his company, was he resurfacing only to demand the very children he tried to disown in court? That wasn't all. Camille's lawyer had flagged something odd. The paperwork was filed through a shell entity in Morocco. Richard hadn't just moved abroad, he had restructured his assets, rerouted his communications, and registered himself under a corporate alias. Even more disturbing, photos surfaced days later of Richard at a luxury resort in Marrakesh, wearing sunglasses, sipping from a crystal tumbler, and sitting beside a woman no one had seen before. She was younger than Isla, and she looked eerily similar to Camille in her 20s. Camille didn't recognize her, neither did any of her investigators. But the woman wasn't a tourist. She was wearing a corporate badge linked to a new startup, one funded by international capital and listed under Richard's name. So the question remained, was this about fatherhood, or was Richard setting the stage for something much more dangerous? Something that had nothing to do with Owen or Bella, and everything to do with reclaiming power through the illusion of redemption. Camille was about to find out, and the answers would lead her into a new courtroom, across new borders, and into a confrontation that would test not only her strength, but her memory. In the weeks following the courtroom verdict, Richard Langley's empire began to unravel in quiet, deliberate layers. At first, it wasn't loud. There were no breaking headlines, no press conferences, just a slow erosion of confidence from the people who once considered him untouchable. Shareholders at Langtech, once eager to associate with Richard's name, began to ask questions behind closed doors. Questions about judgment, about misuse of company funds, about offshore accounts tied to Isla Munro. Camille hadn't submitted those details to the court, but she hadn't needed to. Rumors spread quickly in the tech world, and trust disappears even faster. When an internal audit revealed over $800,000 in questionable expenses logged under strategic partnerships, the board demanded accountability. Richard didn't give it. Instead, he submitted his resignation by email, blaming media fatigue and personal wellness. By the time the public announcement was made, Richard Langley was already on a flight to Dubai. Camille read the news in a quiet cafe near her new studio. She didn't flinch, because she already knew the truth. Richard wasn't retreating. He was running. In Dubai, Richard tried to rebrand himself. He called it a reset. Interviews with foreign media painted him as a misunderstood visionary who'd been targeted by a vindictive ex-wife. He posted cryptic philosophical quotes on social media, deleted them when they didn't land. He shaved his beard, wore traditional linen suits, and gave small lectures at tech forums under pseudonyms. But even there, something felt off. Investors were skeptical. Potential partners cautious. The damage from the trial hadn't just followed him, it had preceded him. Meanwhile, Camille Langley was creating something new. She hadn't planned to reopen her gallery. Not so soon. But one afternoon, Bella handed her a crayon drawing of a woman standing in front of a wall of framed paintings. Underneath it, in shaky but determined handwriting, she'd written, "Mommy's Place." That was all the permission Camille needed. She filed for the business license under her maiden name, Camille Hartwell, and reopened her gallery on a quiet corner of West 16th Street. The first exhibit was modest, a mix of emerging black female artists, local talent, and two pieces of her own she hadn't touched since before Owen was born. But the opening night was electric. Word spread quickly that Camille Hartwell wasn't just a gallery owner. She was a woman who had walked through fire and come out luminous. Within 6 months, every slot for exhibitions was booked through the next year. Her face appeared in interviews, on art blogs, even in a short documentary about mothers re-entering the workforce after emotional trauma. For the first time in over a decade, Camille was known not as Richard Langley's wife, but as her own name. Owen began sketching in a notebook again. Bella enrolled in piano lessons. The house felt like a home. But Camille was not naive. She knew peace was rarely permanent, especially when you'd embarrassed a man like Richard Langley, especially when that man was used to writing the final chapter. What she didn't know yet was that Richard had already begun rewriting his, in another country under another name, with another woman who looked enough like her to raise alarms. And this time, he wasn't coming back to ask for forgiveness. He was coming back for control, and Camille was already in his way. It was a Tuesday morning in early spring when Camille Langley received the second envelope. She had just finished hanging a new series in the gallery, a collection called Mended, inspired by women who had survived public collapse. She was on her way to pick up Bella from piano when the courier stepped through the door, asked for her by name, and handed her a manila folder with foreign postage and a corporate return address. Her stomach dropped before she opened it. It was from Richard's legal team, new attorneys, new firm, new strategy. This time, he wasn't contesting past decisions. He wasn't trying to undo what the court had already ruled. He was filing for joint custody. The document cited rehabilitation, moral transformation, and a renewed desire to restore paternal bonds. It described Richard as a father who had fallen, learned from his errors, and now wished to return, not as a billionaire, but as a parent. Camille reread the paragraph twice. Not because she believed it, but because it was crafted so carefully. She knew it wasn't written by Richard. This was someone else's language. A team of people had put this together. PR advisors, legal consultants, image consultants, working not just to win the case, but to reshape Richard Langley's entire narrative. The filing was accompanied by a series of recent photos. Richard in a white shirt playing chess with a local child in Marrakesh. Richard volunteering at a language school in Tangier. Richard speaking humbly on stage at a mentorship summit for young tech entrepreneurs. Every photo perfectly lit, every caption measured, every image designed to erase the man the world saw in court and replace him with someone Camille didn't recognize. The media wasted no time. Within 48 hours, major outlets ran profiles titled "The Reinvention of Richard Langley." Morning shows called it one of the greatest comebacks of the decade, a redemption arc, a second chance. Even reputable journalists hinted that Camille had kept the children from a man who was simply broken, never bad. Camille watched one anchor say, maybe he just needed to fall apart to realize what really mattered, and switched off the television. The damage was subtle but familiar. She recognized the signs, the language of manipulation repackaged as growth, and once again, she said nothing publicly. But this time, She didn't wait to be blindsided. She called her attorney, requested a full background check on Richard's new life, and braced herself for the results. What came back confirmed everything she feared. Richard had no legal address in the United States. None. Not even a registered mailing box. His primary residence was listed as a serviced apartment in Dubai, registered under a holding company. His bank accounts were filtered through offshore branches, and he was still drawing funds from Langtech's leftover corporate shells, despite claiming he'd walked away from the business. Most notably, Richard had no documented interaction with Owen or Bella since the day the verdict was handed down. No phone calls, no letters, no attempts to visit. He had not asked about their schoolwork, their friends, or their well-being. He had not so much as sent a birthday card. And now, suddenly, he wanted joint custody. Camille didn't believe it, not for a second. This wasn't about fatherhood, this was about access to her, to the children, to the story he had lost control over. And as the media began to pivot in his favor, Camille realized she was no longer defending herself in court. She was defending her children in the public eye, against a machine designed to make people forget. But she hadn't forgotten. Not the courtroom, not the DNA results, not the way Richard had once turned to Isla as the judge read the names of the children he'd denied. And if she had anything to say about it, neither would the court. Because this time, Camille was ready long before the first gavel dropped. Camille Langley had learned long ago that when Richard Langley smiled, it was never just a smile. It was a strategy, a performance, a means to a larger end that only made sense when viewed from above, like a chessboard, not a dinner table. So when the press praised his paternal redemption arc and his lawyers framed the custody petition as an act of healing, Camille didn't react emotionally. She responded methodically. She requested full international asset tracking. She brought in a private investigator who specialized in offshore digital movement, and she paid for a financial forensic analysis out of her own pocket, because even if the court wouldn't ask the hard questions, she would. What came back was a blueprint for deceit. Richard Langley was no father on a mission. He was a disgraced executive rebuilding his influence behind a different flag. In Dubai, Camille learned, Richard had quietly launched a new tech startup, except it wasn't really new. It was a thinly veiled clone of Langtech's failed biometric security division, now rebranded under a new name, Veritech International. The company was registered to an investment group that didn't exist 2 years ago. Its domain name was purchased from a Ukrainian reseller using cryptocurrency, and the team listed on its website, former Silicon Valley experts with impressive LinkedIn profiles, turned out to be AI-generated avatars. Richard wasn't rebuilding a legacy. He was laundering a brand, and the custody battle was the keystone of the operation. Camille's investigator explained it clearly. In international business circles, especially with foreign investors unfamiliar with American court systems, family-oriented redemption stories go further than PR campaigns. If Richard could convince the world he was a misunderstood father trying to reconnect with his children, the media would soften. Potential investors would see vulnerability, humanity. They would stop asking about the financial misconduct in California. They would stop asking about the scandal, and they would believe he had changed. But Camille knew the truth. This had nothing to do with Owen or Bella. They were leverage, optics, symbols in a story Richard was trying to reclaim, not people he intended to parent. The final piece of evidence arrived unexpectedly. Camille's attorney, while researching court jurisdiction laws for international custody enforcement, discovered a detail buried in a Moroccan business registry. A startup conference had listed Richard as one of its keynote speakers. The topic: Resilience through rebranding, winning back trust in the digital age. The event flyer showed him mid-laugh, gesturing toward a screen filled with family photos, stock images staged to resemble authenticity. And in the lower right corner, standing just beside the podium, was the woman Camille had seen in the resort photo. No name listed, no title, just her hand resting gently on Richard's forearm. Camille zoomed in. The woman was wearing a thin bracelet with a small gold pendant. She recognized it. Years earlier, Camille had donated that exact design to a charity auction, an exclusive piece made during her gallery days, one of a kind. She'd signed the back herself. Camille closed her laptop, called her attorney, and said 7 words she never thought she'd say again. We need to go back to court, because now it wasn't just about protecting her children. It was about stopping a fraud in motion, one that would spread further, manipulate deeper, and hurt more people if left unchecked. Richard Langley had made a career out of deception. Camille was about to make a case out of the truth again, and this time she had no intention of walking away quietly. The courtroom was different this time. Bigger, colder, less familiar than the one where Richard Langley first lost everything. It was held in a federal jurisdiction due to the international nature of the new petition, and this time there were no paparazzi lining the sidewalks, no trending hashtags, no whispers of DNA, just a quiet room filled with legal teams, polished wood, and the weight of a man who had returned to reclaim something he had willingly cast aside. Richard entered first. No cameras followed him, but he walked like they did. He wore a soft grey blazer, slacks, no tie, his outfit carefully selected to suggest humility. His beard was fuller now, flecked with grey. His posture was still proud, but his expression had softened in all the ways that make people second-guess the pain they remember. When Camille entered moments later, the room didn't shift, but it became still. She wore the same navy blue dress from the first trial, not out of symbolism, but because she knew Richard would remember it. Her hair was pinned back this time, her shoulders squared, her fingers clasping a single black binder. She didn't look at him. Not once. As the judge began to read through the documents Richard's team had submitted, testimonials from anonymous therapists, letters from foreign school representatives, staged photos of Richard smiling at unknown children, Camille sat motionless. It wasn't until the judge turned to her counsel that the real shift began. Camille's attorney, a quiet but unrelenting woman named Diane Porter, stood and addressed the court with precision. She didn't begin with emotion, she began with numbers. Line by line, Diane submitted copies of bank statements linking Richard Langley to Veritech International. She walked the court through shell companies in Gibraltar, fabricated payroll invoices and email exchanges between Richard's alleged partners, several of whom, it was proven, did not exist outside of online profiles. The court fell silent as screenshots of internal memos were read aloud. In one, Richard writes, "If we can clean the optics by June, the US family angle will get us through the next funding round." Diane didn't pause for effect. She simply continued. She submitted evidence that Richard had made 0 attempts to contact Owen and Bella directly, no birthday cards, no calls, no letters, while simultaneously paying an overseas public relations firm to generate online content portraying him as an engaged father of 2. But it was the final piece that shifted the atmosphere in the courtroom. A witness, flown in from Dubai at Camille's personal expense, entered the room. She was a young woman, no older than Isla Monroe had once been. Her name was Alia Bennett, and she had worked briefly as a receptionist at the co-working space where Veritech International operated. Her testimony was short, but devastating. She told the court that she was paid in cash by Richard Langley himself to stage background activity during video calls with investors. She confirmed that several employees featured in the company's promotional materials were paid models from local casting agencies, and she ended her testimony with one sentence that landed harder than any document. Mr. Langley said if he could win back the kids, he could win back the Americans. Richard didn't blink. He sat still, his jaw clenched, his left hand twitching slightly against his knee. The judge turned to him, then to Camille. He asked if she had anything to say. She stood slowly and spoke just one sentence. "I don't need to prove I'm a mother," she said, "but he just proved he's still not a father." She sat back down. The judge called a recess, and for the first time, it wasn't Richard walking out with his chin up. It was Camille. Not because she had won, but because this time everyone in the room could finally see what she had always known. Richard Langley wasn't here for his children. He was here for his reputation, and Camille had come to make sure he never got either. When the judge returned to the bench that afternoon, the room fell into that strange, breathless quiet that only occurs when everyone knows something irreversible is about to be said. Camille Langley sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes focused on the bench, not on Richard. Richard Langley remained poised, jaw clenched, the performance unraveling just slightly at the edges. But this wasn't a hearing that needed theatrics anymore. The facts had already spoken. The judge took less than 5 minutes to render his decision. Richard's petition for joint custody was denied in full. The court ruled that his request lacked substance, sincerity, and evidence of any real intent to parent. But that wasn't all. The judge went further. He addressed Richard directly, noting that the manipulation of international jurisdiction, the fabrication of a corporate identity built around false fatherhood claims, and the use of children as leverage to restore public image could be subject to investigation for fraud. If the court found reason to believe Richard's overseas venture was built on misrepresented family status, it would not hesitate to forward the case to federal authorities. Richard's hands, once so still, began to tremble ever so slightly. There was no applause, no gavel slam, just a quiet moment that felt like the closing of a vault door. Camille didn't celebrate. She stood, collected her things, and walked to the back of the courtroom where Owen and Bella were waiting with Diane Porter. Owen smiled when he saw her. Bella reached for her hand, and together they stepped into the late afternoon sunlight. The press was waiting, but this time it wasn't Richard's name in the headlines, it was Camille's. The woman who broke the comeback king. From silence to strength, Camille Langley speaks in court again. She gave him everything, then took back her voice. But Camille didn't give interviews. She didn't need to. Her story had already been written, and it wasn't on a blog or a breaking news ticker or a scandal-hungry tabloid. It was written in her daughter's eyes, in her son's laughter, in the quiet of a gallery corner where justice didn't look like revenge. It looked like survival. A month later, Owen stood at his easel in the back of the gallery, painting something with deep concentration. Camille watched from across the room, sipping coffee and feeling, for the first time in years, completely present. When he finished, he called her over and pointed to the canvas. It was a painting of Camille standing on courthouse steps, hand in hand with him and Bella. Above them, in bold red letters, he had written the title, "Mom Wins Again." She smiled, pulled him into a hug and whispered, "We all did." But the story didn't end there. Weeks after the verdict, Camille received an anonymous message. Isla Monroe was back. Older now, quieter, claiming to have a real child this time, reaching out through a mutual acquaintance, asking for help. Camille didn't respond. She forwarded the message to her attorney and deleted it. Later that year, Camille signed a publishing deal. A memoir, not about Richard, but about reclaiming space, motherhood, and identity after erasure. It was titled The Second Name, a tribute to her maiden name, Hartwell, and the strength she rediscovered behind it. By spring, a major streaming service had picked up the rights. Hollywood wanted a story. But Camille had already lived it, and this time she would tell it on her terms. No edits, no masks, no Richard. Just the truth, finally hers to own.